Our quest to find the ideal reference display in 2022 continues to heat up. Does the latest challenger, Sony's new X95K, have what it takes to upset our current leader, the C2 OLED from LG? Let's find out. For over a year, we called the Sony X95J 4K LED TV our reference. And while that display continues to be great in 2022, its replacement, the X95K, gets a pretty big update in the form of full array mini LED backlighting. Mini LED's promise is to provide greater control over LED lighting, resulting in OLED-like contrast, only brighter. Sony continues to improve their cognitive processing, which uses a form of AI to enhance the imagery on screen in a way that appears more natural, rather than enhance the sharpness and contrast globally the way it's been done in the past. The X95K, like the outgoing J, is a 4K native display that supports Dolby Vision and other HDR formats such as HDR10 and HLG. You also get Dolby Atmos and ARC/EARC capability, as well as support for signals up to 4K 120. In addition to 4K 120, gamers will enjoy support for VRR and ALLM, though only HDMI ports 3 and 4 are full HDMI 2.1 specs, so just keep that in mind. The X95K's operating system is, again, Android or Google TV, and with it comes a whole slew of built-in downloadable apps available from the Google Play Store. If you are a Google Power user, the X95K is going to feel like an extension of your everyday life, which includes Google Assistant support. I'm happy to say the OS feels snappier than the outgoing model, though admittedly the newer K hasn't faced a year's worth of updates, so take my praise for the OS with a grain of salt. Of course, if you're one who doesn't care much for Google or its many products, you can always opt to use a third-party streamer, like, say, an Apple TV, connected to one of the Sony's 4 HDMI ports. While I love using Apple TV, there are some benefits to using Sony's built-in apps. For example, you get access to Sony Bravia Core, Sony's higher-end video streaming service, as well as Netflix calibrated picture mode, which only works when viewing Netflix natively through the Google TV OS and not through devices such as an Apple TV. While Sony TVs have historically been pretty good with respect to image accuracy out of the box, I'm afraid Sony's claims that the X95K is calibrated out of the box is a little exaggerated, at least with respect to our 85-inch model. I tested every picture profile and none were perfect. Close, but not perfect. No real surprise that both Vivid and Standard were the brightest profiles, but also the least accurate. Cinema was better with a margin of error of about 6.5. Remember, anything below 3 is technically calibrated, but Custom was the closest to being right with a margin of error of about 3.5. While 3.5 isn't technically calibrated, it's close a damn enough. If you care anything about accuracy, but you aren't going to be splurging for professional calibration, I recommend putting the TV into its custom profile and just leaving well enough alone. But I'm a nerd, so of course I had to see just how good I could make the X95K. Calibrating was easy. Using a meter and the software Display Cal, I was able to adjust the custom profile's grayscale and color until I arrived at a margin of error, or delta E, of 0.1. I know. That puts the Sony in a dead heat with the LG C2 OLED in terms of calibrated results, with there being no real measurable difference between them in terms of their grayscale or color accuracy. But one area where the two differ is in brightness. While I'm not what Caleb Dennison would call a nit nerd, I understand brightness is an important measurement for some of you, and to that end, the Sony is nearly twice as bright as the LG post-calibration, with a real-world full-screen brightness of close to 500 nits in standard dynamic range. That's bright, but not quite as bright as Samsung's 8K flagship mini LED, the QN900B. If you want maximum brightness, you can always select the Sony's Vivid profile, which has 0 issues exceeding 1,000 nits of peak brightness in either S or HDR. It just doesn't look that good. Local dimming is impressive, better than the outgoing X95J, which was more than a little prone to blooming. I'm not saying that the X95K doesn't bloom. All TVs do to a degree, and a little bloom is actually natural, but it's far better than the old model. The only time I really noticed the X95K's lack of OLED-like level of backlight control was during dark scenes of House of the Dragon, where a bright candle came to rest just above the black aspect ratio bars. The bars themselves were true black, but where the bottom of the candle rested against the bar, some blooming could be observed. But that was about it. Outside of extreme cases like that one, blooming was no better or worse than our OLED. As for the dirty screen effect, or DSE, the Sony did well. Yes, during my viewing of DSE test patterns, some discoloration or graying of small portions of the screen were present, but nothing that seemed out of bounds with what I've experienced with other similarly priced and even higher priced TVs. While not edge-to-edge perfect, I wouldn't lose sleep over DSE here. Motion was also excellent. Even with all motion aids turned off, those Sony's intelligent motion settings are better than most, which is why I sometimes leave them on in their lowest setting for ultra smooth motion without inducing the dreaded soap opera effect. Sony is the only TV manufacturer whose motion interpolation is one that I even consider leaving on because it's nowhere near as egregious as other manufacturers. Honestly, I found motion to be exceptional all around. Even fast-paced sports looked really good, especially in 4K HDR, courtesy of Fox. And I know a lot of you ask about how a TV looks when watching sports, which it can be hard to judge because sports broadcasts are mostly craptastic and rife with issues, many of which get blamed on the TV when in reality, it's not your TV that is the problem. The signal is garbage. Watching Texas come dangerously close to beating Bama, the X95K's 4K HDR motion was always buttery smooth and artifact-free. Test patterns aside, the Sony X95K is just a freaking beautiful TV, and it slots right smack dab in the middle between the Samsung QN900B and the LG C2 OLED with respect to overall image enjoyment. The scaling of the Samsung and supreme brightness was impressive, though it resulted in an image that, while sharp as a knife, wasn't always the most organic or natural. The LG, on the other hand, has organic on lock, though certain scenes and darker HDR content still give the LG some grief, whereas the Sony, it's a bit of a Goldilocks in that it takes the best from both TVs and weaves them together. The added brightness gives the Sony TV the upper hand when it comes to darker scenes and dynamic range. When watching the great on our LG, certain fabrics and textures were lost or were more subdued on the C2 because of the LG's lack of dynamic range as you near absolute black, thanks to its lower light output. The X95K, however, displayed not only the subtle textures with more confidence, it outright revealed designs and patterns that were all but non-existent on the C2. Best of all, none of the added detail came at the expense of absolute black, at least not to the naked eye. Also, Sony's color rendering out of the box is simply better than both the Samsung and the LG. Skin tones and primary colors look more right, and the measurements confirm this, especially when using the cinema or custom profile. Now, I keep going back and forth and twisting myself into knots over which TV is ultimately best after calibration. There is no denying that if you have no plans on calibrating your TV, the Sony is the better choice. As for gaming, I don't play a lot of first-person shooters that require ultra-fast everything, but for this casual gamer, the Sony looked to be as smooth and as responsive as both the AK Samsung and our LG C2 OLED. But overall, when it comes to gaming features, the Sony is a distant third. As for sound quality, the internal speakers aren't bad. The X95K can serve as the center speaker when using Sony soundbars or compatible speakers. Just know you have to connect these devices to the TV using a headphone-like cable to pull this off. We no longer have Sony soundbars in-house, so I was unable to test this feature. But speaking of soundbars, the Sony does not automatically play nice with all third-party bars, specifically the Samsung Q990B we have in for review. It took some tinkering and even a restart of both devices to finally enjoy proper Atmos playback. It's all doable, but by no means is it automatic. As for comparisons, I think it should be pretty evident by now where the Sony fits as it relates to Samsung's far costlier QN900B 8K mini LED TV and our C2 OLED we just reviewed. But for those of you, here's a quick refresher. If I had to rank the three TVs, I would put the C2 OLED and the Sony X95K in a dead heat for first, with the Samsung in second place. Honestly, I would be happy with any of these three TVs, though I cannot make up my mind which of the two, the Sony or LG, I ultimately prefer because I can honestly make a case for either. The Samsung is great, but having now lived with the Sony, the Sammy is just simply too bright, and the 8K upscaling, while brilliant, isn't night and day better than the image quality we got through either the LG or Sony's 4K native panel. Now, full disclosure, we did not experience the Sammy at 85 inches, only 75. So perhaps if we had, I'd be singing a different tune because no doubt the additional brightness and resolution would be welcomed in the larger size. But with respect to LG or Sony, I'm not sure. One moment, I'm all Sony, and then the next day, I'm LG. I know, first world problems, but all that said, if you are looking for the best and easiest out-of-the-box experience, the Sony X95K bests both the Sammy and the LG. I mean, it's not even close. As for the outgoing X95J, apart from the inclusion of mini LED, not much has changed. So is the new K worth the upgrade? Yes, but I'm not suggesting that if you just bought the X95J or have owned it for only maybe a year or two, that you need to get rid of it. Don't do that. But if that's not you, you can snag the J on sale right now, and Kristi will link to it in the description. But at the end of the day, the X95K is the better TV. I fully expected to come away from this review proclaiming to you all that I was team, but I can't. I can't decide which of the two TVs, LG or Sony, is ultimately the best for me. I have to pick one because I don't have the space for both TVs, but as of this review, I don't have a clear answer. I bet a lot of you were expecting and maybe even screaming at your screen at this point, OLED is better, you idiot! And perhaps a small part of me is right there with you, but after spending time with the Sony X95K, I'm not so sure. If the Sony proves anything, it's that OLED doesn't automatically mean the best, because near as makes no difference, the Sony X95K, at least our 85-inch model, matches it. So that's it. That is now my take on the fantastic Sony X95K, but before we go, we all want to know what you think of it.
I can't decide.
Really?
I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
I can't pick.
It's hard.
Well, I know for sure the Sammy is in the last place tier, but I can't pick between the LG and the Sony. Mm-hmm. I know that if I didn't have my own personal in-house calibrator, there is no question that I would pick the Sony X95K, hands down. But I do have one of those things.
You do have a calibrator.
I do have one, so that changes everything.
Yeah.
The LG went and got itself a glow up, and now I'm left here wondering whether I like the Sony or the LG better.
Yeah.
The blacks are really, really good with the Sony. That's one thing I kept looking at when we were watching when we were reviewing the TV, trying desperately to find something that I could say specifically was better or worse.
Yeah.
Maybe are they as good as the LG? Maybe not, but it's really, really close. Really close.
I mean, as long as there ain't a candle sitting on like an aspect ratio bar, oh boy, I think people are gonna would have a hard time saying it's not OLED.
I mean, the good news is you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Well, unless you don't calibrate the LG, then good luck.
Oh, yeah.
But otherwise, you can't go wrong. Both, in my opinion, deserve a standing ovation.
Yeah.
Sorry, Samsung. You're just too bright. And that makes your colors a bit weird for me.
Yeah.
The calibration with the phone
is awesome.
Is freaking cool.
Yeah.
I mean, props for that. But now, if I'm just focusing on price.
Okay.
The Sony is the better buy. Since it doesn't require calibration.
Not automatically,
Plus, you get 2 more inches on the LG's 83. Obviously, 2 inches is not a deal breaker, especially if your TV is going to hang on the wall. Mm-hmm. So I guess if I'm only using things like logic and common sense, the X95K from Sony wins. One thing that I'm a little surprised that you didn't talk about.
Oh, no.
I know.
What did I miss?
You missed that the last year's Sony Master Series OLED, the A90J. I know people are going to ask since we reviewed it. So, how would you rank them? And if you're looking at the Sony A90J?
Well, knowing what we know about LG OLED and Sony OLED, and that there's some sharing of technology, shall we say, I would probably actually side with the Sony OLED if I was choosing between LG OLEDs and Sony OLEDs, because the Sony has that cognitive processor, and for whatever reason, it's really hard to quantify, but it does make a difference, and I do like it. And so if I knew that you're basically getting a C2, but with cognitive processing, I'm into that. I'm going to choose that. Now, Sony Master Series OLED last year's model versus the new X95K, I think we're right back where we started, which is I'm going to be really hard pressed to choose one over the other, because the X95K just, I can't stress this enough. It gets very close. And if you're going off of figures and test patterns and things like that, there's not really a difference between these two TVs now. You can have all of your opinions about, oh, OLED's the true whatever, and you know, mini LED or LED in general is always going to suck. That's just not my experience. That's just not what my everyday living with either of these sets has really told me or shown me. And so I may side with the Sony X95K because it's got the brightness, and it's better to have enough to turn down versus not be able to generate enough for some scenes. I know we knocked the Samsung, but I got to tell you, the Samsung's like literally twice as bright as the Sony, which is already twice as bright as the LG. So there's that. There is such a thing as too bright. I'll put it this way. In 2022, hell, even last year and going into 2023, I think you got to work real hard to buy a bad TV. I think we live at a certain level of just excellence across the board, that it's fun that we can now have preferences like, well, I just prefer OLED. Well, great, because OLED rocks, has always rocked, but just keeps getting better and brighter year after year. But as far as like LED can't hold a candle to OLED, like that's not true anymore either. So it's like, pick what works within your budget, has the features you want, and you're probably going to be okay. Oh,
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think if you brought somebody into our house and told them that the Sony was an OLED, they would believe you. There would be no reason to not believe you.
Yeah. Yeah. They would totally believe you. And honestly, people need to keep that in mind. I mean, it's fun. It's fun to have these debates. It really is. But at the end of the day, like, if you're not really told, or you're not busting out meters, or you're not like the most like just critical, like TVs are my thing, man. You'd be surprised what you probably could get away with and find like super pleasurable and a great viewing experience. But also you'd probably be surprised that you would believe that you were looking at one format when in reality you were looking at something else. So.
Yeah, we all know formats don't matter.
At the end of the day, if the movie's good and you're sucked into it, you're really not going to pay much attention to the technology behind it.
The internet just exploded.
Well, anything else about the Sony X95K?
Nope, great television.
All right, guys, that is now our review of the Sony X95K mini LED 4K smart TV and all the other stuff they want to attach to it. What did you guys think? Let us know down in the comments below. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Kristi left for you down below, know that that is a great way that you have continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here. And both of us, thank you very much for doing that. Oh, one more. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it for us today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sight or sound of your system is you. So happy watching, happy listening, just be happy. And we'll see you on the next video. All right.